I was going to read everything to point to go, but it's starting for no,
Hello, everybody. Thank you for those who have come in. We just start taking a few minutes because I think it's taking time for people to come from lunch. But we will start just to make sure that we have time to also wrap up before the next event. So thank you so very much for joining us today at the GEF 7th Assembly for our side event at the 𝗩𝗲𝗄𝗄𝗄 Biodiversity Framework Pavilion, which is this room. Together, so my name is 𝗩𝗲𝗄𝗄𝗲. I'm the Director for Women for Biodiversity. And together with the CBD Secretariat and close collaboration with my colleague here, Olivier, we're really happy to bring this event together to you. Win-win for gender and biodiversity. Transforming women's rights and gender equality for achieving the goals and targets of the 𝗩𝗲𝗄𝗄𝗄 Global Biodiversity Framework. Now, this event is going to be looking at reimagining humanity's relationship with nature through an exploration of the roles of women's rights, gender equality, and more in general, human rights for achieving biodiversity targets and goals by 2030. As you all know, in December last year in 2022, parties to the Convention on the CBD at COP15 adopted a robust post-2020 gender plan of action with the aim of promoting the gender-responsive implementation of the framework with gender-responsive mechanisms while supporting women's equal access to resources, services, and technologies, and their engagement in the governance, conservation, and sustainable use of biodiversity. As you all know, the popularly known as the KMGBF, the 𝗩𝗲𝗄𝗄𝗄 Global Biodiversity Framework, is also the first Rio convention to include a specific target on gender equality, target 23, thus setting up a very ambitious agenda. The framework emphasizes the need for gender equality and women's empowerment as being critical for successful implementation. I'm going to keep it at that. And together with me today, my co-moderator is Olivier, so I'm going to invite him to take over for this session. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you very much, Tina, and welcome to everybody. Before we kick off, I'd like to invite my colleague, 𝗩𝗲𝗄𝗄𝗄, who is here to welcome all of you on behalf of the City Secretariat.
Many thanks, Olivier, and many thanks, Tina. On behalf of our Acting Executive Secretary, I'd like to give you all a very warm welcome to this event, a win-win for gender and biodiversity, transforming women's rights and gender equality for achieving the goals and targets of the 𝗩𝗲𝗄𝗄𝗄 Global Biodiversity Framework. My name is 𝗩𝗲𝗄𝗄𝗄, and I'm the Acting Director of the Division of Implementation Support at the Secretariat, and also heading the unit on stakeholder engagement and cooperation. I'd like to thank, first of all those who have been involved in organizing this event, particularly Women for Biodiversity, that as part of the CBD Women's Caucus has been a constant and essential presence in the negotiation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as the development of the renewed gender plan of action. SwedBio, of course, that has been an important partner of the CBD. Also to the co-organizers, IUCN, WWF, UNDP, and the Indigenous Information Network. Again, each of them are important partners in the CBD and essential to the objectives being addressed in this side event. When I saw this event in the draft program of the side events for this assembly, it was clear that this was the first of those events that we felt was essential to be brought in to this pavilion on the global biodiversity framework. And so thank you for joining us in this program. When we think of the objectives of the historic Montreal COP, of course, first and foremost in our mind is the adoption of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, a global biodiversity framework that fully recognizes the importance of gender equality and the role of women and girls in achieving its objectives. But also, and equally important, was the adoption of a renewed gender plan of action. Before I hand over and back to my friend and colleague Olivier, we have a very important guest in the room, Mr. 𝗩𝗲𝗄𝗲, who was instrumental in stewarding the development and the negotiation of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and right from the outset placed a huge priority in consultation with all actors and all stakeholders. That started off in the regional dialogues that were convened to prepare the process, and then throughout the meetings of the open-ended working group. As a representative of the government of Canada, it's also important to recognize that Canada is a particular friend of gender and is very supportive and instrumental in the development and the final adoption of the renewed gender plan of action. And therefore, without further ado, I would be very grateful if Basil could join us and make a few opening remarks. And I think no one better place to do so in the context of the agenda and objectives of this event.
Good day to all of you. It's a pleasure to be with you again. As you know, and you heard, some of you may have heard me several times talking about gender issues and why it's important. Not only it's important from a value perspective, and I can never say no when Tina asks me to do something. But it is important if we want to be successful. There will be no successful implementation of the GEF without women participation, for very practical reasons. If I want to talk about agriculture, knowing that women are the majority of the workforce in agriculture in most countries, including developed ones, you have to talk to women. And we have to have women talking to women, not me. So I'm asked to talk about the negotiation, and then Neil has talked about the work we've done in terms of consultation. But what I really want to talk is about implementation. Because now the difficult work has started, and I know many governments are starting their implementation, redrafting their NBSAPs, and that is what counts. So I'm looking forward to hear the panel. I think I'm going to be asked at the end to say a few words, so I'm going to listen very carefully about the experience of the various groups and the advice, and we'll all learn together on how we can do this implementation better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Neil. I think there's no better way to set the scene to get started. So with these opening remarks, I'd like to invite the panelists here. stage. Those are on the road. We unfortunately have some families who are starting other meetings, but those who are in the room, please, Amelia, welcome to the stage. Lucy still. So we have also. And to join us here.
Thank you so very much for joining in for I See Some Morning Faces. So we wanted to start these sessions first with like following up with Basil and Neil, like the key players and how the process happened in the CBD. And a very crucial and important part, and thanks to the CBD Secretariat and the co-chairs and also the parties, and the space in the CBD has been really very inviting for the voices of civil society. So today I'm really happy to bring on the floor two of our colleagues and allies. One, we have the, I'm going to introduce them first. So Amelia Arreguin, who's the Women's Caucus coordinator. I'm also specialist in gender, development, and environment. She has worked in the non-government sector for over a decade, promoting democratic environmental governance while mainstreaming the rights of women and girls. She's also the former coordinator of the Latin American and Caribbean chapter for the Mexico chapter of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. She's also a member of the IUCN CES and IUCN CEC. In her spare time, she can be found bird watching, cycling, or hiking. So I'm happy to have Amelia here, who also over the years I've worked very closely with as Gibbon, a young woman from the Gibbon team, but also now in our team leading the Women's Caucus work. And I'm also really very happy to welcome another young woman who I've known for many years. She is Melina 𝗧𝗶𝗺𝗲, who is the co-founder of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, which is a youth constituency at the CBD. Melina is a biologist and environmental justice advocate, intrigued by the wonders of nature and all of its inhabitants. She's a co-founder of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, the International Youth Coordination Platform and constituency to the Convention on Biological Diversity, and has been coordinating Gibbon's capacity building and empowerment program. She has also helped establish and develop the network to become a vibrant global youth movement for biodiversity with 1.2 million members and member organizations in 145 countries. And in 2020, she has also been awarded the Midori Prize for Biodiversity. So I'm really very happy to welcome both of these young women. Unfortunately, another colleague of ours who is not able to join because she's in a different event, is Lucy Mulenkei from the IWBN, Indigenous Women Biodiversity Network. So for now, I do wear multiple hats. So I'm also going to be sitting there as an Indigenous woman. So I'm going to join the panel with all of them. I'm going to give my own introduction, maybe brag about this opportunity to brag. So my name is 𝗓𝗲𝗍. I am an Indigenous woman from Nepal, born and brought up in India, but currently for the last 10 years, I've made Thailand my home, from where Women for Biodiversity is based. I have worked several years, started work with Indigenous peoples movement, looking at protected areas and governance structures. And that's where my passion began for ensuring that the environmental governance is based on human rights, but also ensuring that there is gender equity within those frameworks. So with that, I will join the podium with my colleagues. Thank you.
Very much, Tina, and it's an honor for us as the Secretariat to be hosting this event, collaborating with you on this event. I was asked to really give a brief introduction of where we are to set the scene for discussion on this panel. As my colleague mentioned, the adopted the agenda of action, which is in and of itself very ambitious. And now the next steps is the implementation of the agenda of action. And what is important, I think, is to reflect on the agenda of action in its totality and how it relates to the specific targets of global biodiversity and also the means of implementation and content. As you all know, the structure of the GPA has various sort of section, purpose, modalities, expected outcomes, objectives, and then interestingly enough, some indicative actions that have to be undertaken at the national level for implementation, possible deliverables, proposed timelines, and responsible actors. I mean, the structure is important that provides a framework for implementation of the general plan of action, but within the framework of the implementation of the GEF. I think that's where the relation is important with the implementation. With regards to the expected outcome, the objectives of the general plan of action, there are various issues that are reflected with the GPA, including increased all women's internals ownership, control of the land, access to natural resources, ensure equal access of women to resources, services, technologies, gender equitable access in relation to access to beneficial instruments, promote women's empowerment, entrepreneurship, identify and eliminate prevent and responsible for gender-based discrimination and violence. So you see that the general plan of action, the GPA reflects also its cross-cutting issues that are dealt with in other areas of the GPA. So it's important that implementation integrates all those cross-cutting issues, including the participation and leadership of women at all levels, and also the capacity development related objective, which is the outcome 3, the GPA with regards to developing capacity with regards to the implementation of the GPF itself. And of course, the issue that is of interest to us here is the leveraging of human and natural resources for the implementation of all. So with this brief introduction, to hear from the voices of the actual stakeholders involved and who have been involved not only in the negotiation of the GPA, but also now in its implementation. I'd like to kick off the panel discussion by getting some views from the different panelists who have been introduced as to what are some of the reflections coming out of competition since we have all these milestones and achievements of competition. Now, what are your reflections, first of all, with regards to what was achieved, and what are the key messages and the key actions being taken from there to implementation on the ground and fostering collaboration among the various networks that are involved in implementation. Thank you very much. So I think we can start with Amelia, and then we will go on that.
Thank you so much, Olivier and Dina, for organizing this event and having us here. I first of all would like to say that we need to acknowledge, as you have been saying, that the COP15 was a major gain for all of us and for human rights. And I think that having Target 22, Target 23, the GPA, it's the result of many years of work of many people that help us to recognize the gender and environmental intelligence. I think that it's one of the main outcomes of COP15, because even if it has been in the air, not that it has been mentioned somewhere during these years, there was no concrete decision or concrete instrument within the CBD that bring gender equality to the front, that there was no explicit action demanded. But now we have, as you have been mentioning with detail, like the different decisions And we think at least the decision on the Common Global Biodiversity Framework. And we have within that the two targets, 2022 and 23, and the gender plan of action. And what I think that could be taken from these instruments that are critical to advance women's rights and how can we implement them is that, first of all, consider women as partners, considering women and girls in their whole diversity, that was an issue in the negotiations, to understand that the reality that women and girls live around the world is not the same, because their identity, their life, their culture, it also cross the way they exist in this world. So they also cross challenges, but also the opportunities. They have the contributions they can bring into this process. And I think that that is one of the elements that we need to also stress as possible. Because if we are speaking about implementation and next steps, we should be also thinking about context-based actions. And that means that the gender plan of action, the target 2023 on implementation, gender responsive implementation of the framework cannot be done in the same way in every country or in the whole world. It has to be done in direct dialogue with the different women's groups, with the different indigenous represented and local women's around each country. I also would like to highlight that out of this COP15, apart from the GPA and from the Montreal framework, we also have a monitoring framework decision, right? And this is really critical because we have there the mandate of parties and all the society and many other stakeholders, because we also have to recognize this, that even if the parties have the legal obligation to implement the framework, we know that they cannot do it alone, and there's what this framework was adopted with a whole of society approach, because since the urgency of the matter, all of us we really need to take action soon, and starting yesterday. But for that action to be fully implemented, we need to have an instrument that can tell us if we are really progressing or having progress or not, and in which sense. So this other decision on the monitoring framework is also a critical point that could help us. It's not there, the possibility is there, but depending on which is going to be the last the result of the negotiations of this process, we will see if it is going to actually help us measure how gender responsive is the implementation of the framework. Because if we just have a question saying yes or no, it's going to be complicated to see how women's lives have been improved or not. You also mentioned, Olivier, that there is a particular objective from the GPA that says, and this is the 3.6, that there is also a mandate to allocate adequate human and financial resources to support rights-based, gender-responsive implementation of the Montreal Biodiversity Framework. And having these words in a COP decision is not something that we should take for granted. Like it's actually the point for all of us, I would say, as constituencies and as citizens, to hold our governments accountable for the way they are going to conduct biodiversity policy, on the strategies or the actions that they are going to take forward to achieve their goals. It's not that they can just do any action to achieve the goals, but they have really taken into account and do it starting from the rights-based approach. And this brings me to, also I want to link on why we are here at the GEF Assembly, and is that one of the critical moments or one of the critical agenda items for this assembly is the adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, which comes out from the COP15, right? Because there was a decision saying to the GEF that this special fund should be adopted. But how this framework, this special fund is going to work, it's also bounded to this other decision, to this element that I just have stressed, that is, it has to be guided by human rights-based approach. How we are going to this, how the decisions on where the money should go and how it should be disbursed and how it should be also monitored should be based or should follow a human rights-based approach. There's many other comments that could be done, but I would say that this is a major point in history for the environmental policy, at least for us as gender advocates and gender justice advocates, because the decisions are there. It's not an option. Like, it really took years of negotiation to have those that language there, and could seem that is something not important if it's one word or the other, but gender responsive is different about gender sensitive. So that's why we should also be proud of what we achieved back there in COP. And it wasn't just that month for the previous years. And now moving into the implementation, we need to pay attention to the resource mobilization strategy, particularly the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, and ensuring the direct access to this fund to the women on the ground, because of the practical reason that Vasil mentioned. But I would also want to stress, because of justice, because of this historical debt that the whole society have towards women and girls that has been taking care of all of us for many generations. So it's just for practical reason, but also for a point of justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think this was a very rich input. Thank you for reminding us, first of all, of the achievement in and of itself, the effort that went into the adoption of the GEF and the context of the biodiversity decisions. I think what was also interesting to hear is this idea that the implementation of the GPA is also linked to having an approach of all government, all society approach that is to be contextualized, because the implementation of the country specific is important to the finance is important. We also touched upon a very important issue of the work in progress right now, because the monitoring framework that we have for education and so we try to aware only in terms of the implementation of the overall GEF. And also pointing out that, of course, if we have this decision of the nation will have to sort of move forward and find ways in which they can be done with all actors involved. Also address issues that we have in the message of the justice interest issues. Those are key elements. So with this, I'd like to invite Melina also give other perspectives and also perhaps also as a youth representative or former representative to give us some perspective from our own with regards to the same question goes with production.
Thank you very much, Olivier and Tina and everybody for being here or for organizing this event. I think I agree with Amelia. I think it was very historical what we all were able to achieve in Montreal, even after 5 years, just with the pandemic and everything. And I think there are a couple of lessons that we can take from the CBD process and how it was the process from getting like a brilliant gender plan of action adopted, but also like the gender targets, the participation target. And I think it comes from the CBD is historical that since we are talking about nature, like it has always been difficult to like disconnect the people like from nature. And the people that I'm talking here is like what we would call like the little people, the ones that usually don't have the power, right? And since we are talking from the GEF like perspective, which is where like we are talking about the high cost of money, and usually the place where the little people that are on the ground are not present. And I think like we are changing this. I think from a couple of years in the past we have been changing, and I think like the CBD has been one of the like first spaces where like rights holders like of the little people have been present. I think the connection with nature between Indigenous people, like women, Brazil was talking a little bit about at the beginning, now coming a little bit from the community of young people and like people thinking about like what would be the perspective of the future generations. Like, so we are talking about this cluster of the little people that their livelihoods, their lives are directly like linked to the land, to nature, to the territories, to the resources. And so for these people, it's a matter of life. And it's also what they do, it's their experience. So I think like now, what we were able to achieve in CBD is that all those groups work together. And I think that is one of the key ingredients for the implementation, like the synergies and the partnerships that have been built at the international level or at the negotiation level. They need to be maintained, they need to be enhanced at the implementation level. So why? Because as gender, as rights, as like justice, they are all cross-cutting issues, right? And so we are not going to be able to achieve any of the targets of this framework if we don't have a cross-cutting perspective and take into consideration intersectionality, meaning like who are the people that are being affected by this framework, who are the people that have agency to do things, who are the people behind the policy. And if we don't think about it, and if we don't commit into policies, into regulations, into safeguards, they're gonna be able to bring equity, not only from also gender perspective, but also from a power perspective. Like we are not gonna be able to break away from the system and actually do transformation and actually be able like to achieve the goals. And I think this has been the perspective of many people since the beginning in the negotiation process of this framework. So like coming from the Global Biodiversity Network, we organized like over the course of like 5 years because of the pandemic consultation across all our communities. And at the moment we have over 60 national chapters, mostly in the mostly in the global south, and over 700 member organizations. So like, and young people, like which is millennials and post-millennials, they were very clear about their priorities. They want a transformative change so that we can break away from this value of like only caring about profit, you know, and kind of like separating ourselves from nature and from each other, like to a future that is truly like equitable and in harmony with nature. And so young people have approached this whole process from this very sort of cross-sectoral, intersectional perspective, and been focusing on what can drive the transformation. And like the three things that we decided collectively that could drive the transformation is the inclusive participation, meaning we need to like equalize like the differences, like in terms of power, in terms of participation, in terms of access, in terms of justice, so that more people's perspectives, and especially the little people's perspectives, which almost never are at the core of decision making, can flourish. Because they are going to bring the perspectives of the ground. They are going to bring immense knowledge from practices, and I think that's what Brazil was talking about in terms of like the participation of women. the leadership of women in agriculture. I come from Brazil, and we have leadership of women in fisheries. We have leadership of women in like community-based, like extraction and livelihoods. Like even in the cities, like who takes the decision about what we're going to eat, how we're going to eat, what is the household, how the household is going to consume. Those are women. They have this knowledge. And like now there is a lot of like studies coming out, starting with the pandemic, which were the government that implemented best planning, best policies, and done better under the pandemic, right? So I think like now it's really the time that we have to break away like historical models of oppression, like they include the oppression of women and the so-called little people, the people with no power, and actually make them visible. And I think the global biodiversity framework has a lot of opportunities into that. We all fought a lot. We all pushed a lot our governments, and we were successful. Like there were things that we were not so successful, I have to say. But like if you look at the framework, there are several candidates that are talking about like inclusion. There's talking about representation. That's talking about access to information, access to justice. And there is a lot like in terms of like transformation, real system change, and real talk about equity. So to go away from that idea that nature is just nature separated from people, but actually that we are all part of nature, and that as part of nature, we should like manage, we should live in harmony with it, right? So just like as final, like I wanted to throw a little bit of light and sort of like suggestions for the implementation process. And I have one example. So I'm from Brazil, and like a couple of like years ago, like the then president, like the government instated a policy like to help lift people in Brazil out of poverty and out of hunger. And that policy would constitute more or less into giving a financial support to like low-income households, so that what they would get that support if the kids would be in the school. And that in Portuguese was called the 𝗧𝗶𝗺𝗲, which in a translation would be like a family sort of scholarship. And like there was one decision that made the whole difference. So like the decision that made the whole difference was that this very little financial support that for like usually people like middle class not so much, but for people that were like really struggling, it was quite a little bit. It was given to the mothers. So it was not given to the dad or the head of the household, but it was given to the mothers. And why is that? Why was that the major game changer? And like they didn't know how that consequence, like how we would still see consequences decades afterward. Because first, in Brazil, among low-income like families, a lot of the families are single moms, right? A lot of like the dads don't really stay with the family. Is the mom that ensures the kid goes to school? Is the mom that is going to ensure that's well fed? And so that program has been successful. And honestly, today we see a lot of like people that came from low-income families that have been benefited from this program in universities, in positions like sort of like going beyond, you know, what was supposed for them to do, because they are being given more opportunities. So what I'm trying to say is that like we are living in a system that has traditionally marginalized women, young people, children, like Indigenous people. And that for us to be able to break through the system and actually achieve like all the targets that we're setting ourselves internationally, we will need to think differently. We will need to be very, very serious and diligent into checking every policy, how it's going to be affecting women, children, indigenous people, like the marginalized people, how their representation is going to be like sort of like ensured, right? Because that is the only way we're going to be able to transition and like get out of this. So I'm actually like suggesting now for the discussions of implementation that at everywhere of what you can do, and this is an exercise that our community always did in like the discussion, like what you in your job, in your position, in your reality, in the decisions that you can take, how can you include like the perspectives of the people that are not usually part of it? And like how can you ensure gender balance, gender representation into the policies or into the decision making? And I think this will take us a long way, you know, like into implementing and into bringing us back closer to nature and closer to the whole web of life. Thank you.
Thank you very much for very insightful inputs, and I would say a couple of points that I think would complement what the first panelist was also discussing with regards to also highlighting what the achievements of the COP and its game-changing implementation, and going through the very specific example of women empowerment and leadership and how this has yielded results, very tangible results on the ground. And the need to think through also these issues of justice and interest and also access to facilities for women and empowerment, issue of financial empowerment that we discussed. So I will also now give the floor to Tina for some remarks in this person.
Thank you. Olivier, like I think a lot has already been said with Amelia and Marina, but I will say my say too with complementing that. I will not go on specifically on the we build up from there. So compounding on what they really talked about is that I think one of the key, first is the reflection. And I think one of the reflections I see for myself, I'm engaging with the CBD for so many years, is that of course to support the CBD Secretariat and also having amazing adaptive co-chairs to support the process, but it's also sharing the way the civil society or the stakeholders engage with each other. And I think it was very commendable because I don't know about other spaces, but I think at the CBD, we share with each other. We really try to make sure that our messaging support each other and our messaging are aligned with each other. We really do keep that communication alive because we do understand that we all are part of the process. It's not to kind of, come up with completely very different ideas, but how do we complement and have a collective messaging when we go to these meetings. So I think that has been one of our really biggest a win for us, the way that we collaborate with each other. Now coming to the outcome of the CBD, and of course everybody's talking about Target 23. I also really want to remind people that Target 23 is not a one decision, which is 15.3. But besides that, there were also other COP decisions that came out from the COP 15, including the two protocols, Mulenkei and the 𝗩𝗲𝗄𝗄 protocol. Now, of course, we are talking about, the gender plan of action, which also has components. When you're talking about the gender plan of action, it's not only for the women, but I'm also hoping to be also shared with all the work and all the decisions of the COP, right? Because that's the way of implementing the whole, I've been talking about the Nagoya protocol, talking about the biosafety protocol, to also make sure that how the gender plan of action is also guiding that work. So that is something I really want to remind us not to forget. But also with the understanding that Target 3 does not stand alone by itself. We always call it the standalone target on gender equality. But of course, having also understanding that the Target 23, if you all know the negotiations, was also adjusted in a way to say that the target 23 will also be a complementary target that would guide the implementation also of the rest of the 22 targets. So it's not like saying that target 23 is to implement the gender plan of action. The target 23 should also implement and ensure that, are you talking about 30 by 30? We're talking about restoration. We're talking about climate change and use-based approaches or NBS, or if you're talking about agriculture and nutrition, we're talking about invasive alien species or wildlife management, that the component of the target 23, because it does say that target 23 is to also implement the 3 pillars of the convention: sustainable use, conservation, sustainable use, and accidental sharing. So just saying that, and I'm also saying that this is really very important development of the NSAPs. So of course, we are saying that the national target should have a gender equality target, but also to ensure that some of the national targets, where they are being implemented, will have a component of 23 within, say, target 15, which I think is very important. That's the mainstreaming target. So I want to just keep it as some key things to take forward with this, on building up on what we talked about, the importance of all these elements. And I'm not going to, I know that Olivier has to get rushed to the event, so we will switch moderation. So I will leave it up to that, and I know you may have questions. Please, we wanted to be this engagement, but we just started a bit late. So after the second panel, instead, we will open the floor for questions and sharing. So please stay with us.
Thank you very much, Tina. And before I hand over my role as co-moderator to you, so that you can chance, I'd like to thank again all the panelists for their time, for insights and for goods. Onto this, Tina, you ended up as the commission for gender issues across programs convention, as we're now, all of us as the secretariat trying to align our own programs together. It's also important to consider that there are decisions that are outside of the convention, in general dimensions, implementation and of course nationally, like the end steps of the gender considerations are like. So thank you very much. And wish you good luck with the second part of the panel.
Thank you. Okay, so from the panelists to be the moderator, we're just changing situations because everybody is cross-cutting all the events. So also for the panelists, do please stay back, Amelia and Amelia, if there are any questions or kind of sharing. So as I will start for the next panel, so as we talked about what were the reflections of the CBD, now this next panel will also have people who are actually working with projects on the ground. So first, I would like to call 𝗩𝗂𝗄𝗲, who's a resident rep for the UNDP Nepal. 𝗩𝗂𝗄𝗲 was the UNDP's deputy resident rep for Program of Operations Nepal since 2018. She also served as UNDP's deputy resident rep in the United Kingdom of Morocco from 2018 to 2021, as well as in the Republic of Algeria from 2028 to 2018. Earlier in her career, she served in Bangladesh as a head of office and coordination and aid effectiveness advisor to the UN resident coordinator. Additionally, she also was the portfolio manager for UNDP Bangladesh in charge of agriculture, food security, and rural development portfolios. 𝗩𝗂𝗄𝗲 holds an MSc in economics, sociology, and rural development from the Faculty of Agriculture, Belgium. I can't see this downward. She also speaks French and fantastic French and English, besides English. Next on stage, I'd like to call 𝗓𝗂𝗄𝗲, who's a conservation area director from the World Wildlife Fund, US, with a career spanning the public, multilateral, and NGO sectors of Latin America. She has over 15 years experience on biodiversity policy design and conservation finance. Before coming to WWF, she worked for Mexico's National Commission for Protected Areas, where Lucia was responsible for leading teams on conservation finance, private sector engagement, sustainable tourism, and consolidation of inclusive value chains. She has closely collaborated with international organizations, including the GEF, UNCBD, UNEP, GEF, Rukundo, and AFD. She actively contributes to conservation efforts as chair of other Mexican organizations and by engaging with environmental youth groups. So Lucia holds a BSc in biology and master's in environmental management. So welcome. And on the third one, we have Samantha. Please, we have a young woman panelist here too, so it's really great. So Samantha is from, who works with Action Aid Zambia. And unfortunately, Jamie, who you see on there from IUCN, is unable to join us because she's a bit under the weather. Hopefully she's COVID-free. So we've had her colleague, Samantha, join us on the panel, who's from, from Action Aid. Action Aid, which is a partner in the RISE grant of USAID and IUCN collaboration. So welcome, all three of you. So now I'm going to sit here and ask them questions. Multiple role playing. And as my computer is there, I cannot see any questions. I'm going to kind of roll with it. So anyways, thank you so much for joining us here. Please, just want to make it a bit more open, so like more of a conversation. So I may kind of evolve around the questions that I had sent you or you sent us. So first, Aishin, from your experience, also understanding that two of the agencies that are here are also GEF implementing agencies. So I also wanted to know your perspective and working with the UNCBD, particularly in Nepal, and also the portfolio that Nepal has, right? Would you like to share a little bit about it? And how do you see that work later with the gender plan of action? And you know, that will be something that countries will be talking about.
Very good afternoon. Namaste to all of you. Yes, so I would, perhaps you were going to ask me about global UNCBD, but it's fine. First of all, global UNCBD can do that, yes. No, but I think, I mean, it's just to kind of reframe it, the panel and the conversation. This title would not have flown in between the gender and biodiversity without social inclusion. You know, in Nepal, everything when it comes to gender, we always put social inclusion, because without social inclusion, gender will not stand for this. Just you know that, but not for our participants. But this gender plan of action that comes with the GBF, and we spoke a little bit in the early hours. For UNDP, and also for everyone, I think it's, first of all, it's a hope. It's another hope that things might change. I think I really believe in it, that you have different periods of lives that you think that, oh, something is going to work, and then you lose that hope, and then again something comes. And each time there is a convention, there is a treaty, there is a declaration, something introduced, you get that hope. And again, here I think it's a hope, particularly with the funding side. And it's also an opportunity, particularly looking from UNDP's perspective, opportunity because we also have put biodiversity, gender, resilience, governance, poverty, all as our package for strategic plan in the next couple of years. So it's for us definitely an opportunity. It's opportunity, as you said, to bring synergy. All of these different conventions, treaties, and coming together, what is it that we could propose as a gender plan of action? You just mentioned about Nepal. Nepal has ratified some 24 different human rights conventions, treaties, 24 plus. So in terms of implementation, as we get stuck each time, and this is not only for Nepal, but also for other countries, I guess. But that's why I'm trying to kind of put that synergy, bringing that synergy around. SDG, 7 years left. We are completely off track. in many of the targets and indicators. So we could expect that this opportunity plan of action could not only find gender SDG 5, but also all the other targets in each of the 16, 17 SDGs, and we could combine this and make that SDGs hope again. Human rights based approach, I think that's again it's part of the plan of action. This is where when I say that social inclusion for me, definitely gender plan of action can help us to further push this human rights based approach. Why? I think you said about it. Indigenous people, which is immediately the next piece is for me, and it is in the gender plan of action. Indigenous people connecting into Nepal, 59 different indigenous groups in Nepal. Some 35% of women population, they are indigenous. They are close to forests, they are in the mountains, they are in buffer zones, they live close to the river, yet they are not as recognized as they would like to be for various reasons, historically as much as recent times. Even Nepal constitution has evolved. There are still a lot of things to do. How? Again, coming back to gender and biodiversity, the land rights, I think you mentioned about it. 19% only women in Nepal have the land rights and the ownership of them. It's completely aside. So what to do? This heritage and papers, citizenship certificates, things that you need completely to get this piece of paper to claim and to decide, not nothing over there. The forest in Nepal, the forest management, if you take last 40 years, it did a lot of good things. The forest cover is 40% right now, and it will remain and it will go up to 45% because it is an NDC target. So we are good in Nepal in terms of forest management. And if we go a bit inside this forest management, and if you look into the indigenous people who are part of this whole forest ecosystem, this is where the legalization of the forest throughout the history has somehow did not take into consideration the indigenous people's rights in the forest. It's Talu community, or it's the communities who were completely depending, consuming, preserving the forest and utilization of the forest products. So this is something that so ILO 169, I think I spoke about it again yesterday. You spoke about Nagoya, you spoke about Cartagena. This coherence of these conventions coming together and looking at it in terms of what is in there for women, the gender, the people marginalized, because this is intersectional equation that we are looking at. I hope this plan of action with resources coming to countries, hopefully, will give a standalone opportunity to find for this. My last piece is about a country like Nepal, LDCs graduating and done a lot of interesting and obvious jumps in terms of social development, maternal mortality, child mortality, a lot of good things happen in social development. So what currently Nepal lacks is the economic development, because jobs, a lot of young people, jobs and social protection and livelihood opportunities. These are the lacking pieces. So where do they get it from? They either go towards tourism related to biodiversity, once again, so it will be nature or mountains. So tourism, which gives you opportunity for livelihoods. They go for manufacturing and so forth, but need small micro enterprises, not big thing. The last thing, they agriculture, obviously, and last thing is they get out of the country. And as I said, I think this morning, 2,000 young people every day, if we take it as an average, they leave the country and are not for better opportunities elsewhere. So this migration, leaving women, though mostly these men are migrating, it leaves men, women in rural Nepal, and basically giving them a lot of roles that were not part of their traditional roles, customary rules, and for which that they have to understand and get this thing. Last, perhaps without offending anyone, so for this development is happening in Nepal. It's in curve. A lot of hydropower projects. Because Nepal, it's rivers and mountains, water. We need energy, we need electricity. There's also a lot of hydropower. So hydropower projects, where do they take place? They take place in the rivers and they remove forests, and who are kind of affected from these big hydropower projects or development projects, roads, infrastructure. These are indigenous communities whose free and prior informed consent that we speak about in these conventions are not necessarily taken and adopted. So I really hope this plan of action will give us a bit more space to go deep into these different issues raised in UPR, Universal Periodic Review, or any international convention that when we, as UNDP, because we see it from different parts, we see it from biodiversity, but we are also in human rights. We are in the parliament, with the assemblies. We are working with the local governments, the mayors, the deputy mayors. Most of the time in Nepal, these are women. These are by constitution, and who are part of the judicial committees to resolve the domestic disputes. Most of the time related to nature, these disputes. So as UNDP and obviously other UN agencies are with us, we see it from different angles, and we hope, and that's why I say it's a hope, and it's an opportunity again, this kind of action that will give us more chances. And I hope I'm looking at the Secretariat that you have to come to Nepal. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we should start this on schedule. I think we need a lot of discussions, so that you have quite a few reflections on that. And I think we should also links up with your work, Lucia, and also Samantha. One thing you talked about is the GEF, and you don't have to span out to really look at the realities, the ground realities that are actually there. It is going to be quite challenging, like you talked about. The challenges of like economic targets, and I keep looking at mainstreaming part of that, of saying how can you really make sure that those projects, somebody at the end talked about on the BRS this year, but I'm going to repeat your thing. But I think that we really need to make also sure that to replace something bad, whatever policy planning project we are getting is not something that we will have to put more energy in solving it. So it has to be something that is grounded in social justice. It has to be grounded in economic justice. It has to be grounded in environmental justice. So where do we really find that balance? And I think that, I'm talking about gender issue we talked about, and this will link up, Samantha, on your work on the rights work, is we really don't forget that people are like, why is women with infrastructure? As when infrastructure comes in, you have the highest rates of gender-based violence. You have the highest rates of migration. So there are those linkages. Now, having said that, one of also the other part, like Nepal, where they say that they're almost at over 40% of their overhead is economic conservation. So now, from you, this year is because you're of course from the GEF and conservation. How do you see that part as a 30 by 30 and ensuring that it actually is rooted into human rights and gender justice?
Well, first of all, congratulations for this event and thank you for the invitation. I would like to begin by saying that in the last 4 years, I heard a lot the word ambition, 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 and now we're changing to implementation, implementation, implementation. And I think that that is the challenge that we are facing right now. How to make sure that implementation can be transparent, how can we make sure that it's accountable, and how can we make sure that we are having conservation impact. And in this context, I would like to begin by saying that all of you, all of us made history by being part of the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal GEF. It's the first time, as Amelia said, that we have Target 23 focused on gender, that we have a gender action plan as part of a decade-long biodiversity framework. But I would like to make 3 points on how we are working on this in different geographies, specifically in my home country, in Mexico. So to ensure the support for the realization of women's rights to land and resources, a key factor is to ensure that gender, not only women, but gender is considered throughout the different value chains. We're talking about agriculture, as we mentioned. We're talking about infrastructure, as was mentioned. But one example that I wanted to bring to you is that in many countries in Latin America, and I know that this is the case also in Pacific Islands, also in Africa, also in Asia, there are a lot of protected areas where sustainable use is allowed. And we need to make sure that we are working with the communities, of course. But I wanted to put an example of a financial mechanism that we designed last year to make sure that gender can be included into the pricing costs of a fish when you will sell it. So this example of the fishing industry really showed us the gender disparities that we are seeing. So we need to acknowledge that many activities have been underpriced or are not priced at all when we have women into value chains. And for example, in fisheries, women are responsible for many pre and post harvest activities. Namely, they are invisible in the fishing narrative and they hold very little decision-making power in fishery organizations. And the triple crisis that we are focusing on and that we are trying to address also with the GEF are worsening these gender inequalities. But I would like to give you some figures. Global studies suggest that women's contributions to fisheries represent almost 47% of global fishing labor. But in the case of Mexico, it ranges from 20 to 50% when the complete value network is considered. And another example is that 80% of people employed in the fisheries sector in Mexico are women, but their number represents only those dedicated to capture and underestimate women-led elements or women-led activities. So what we really need is to make sure that if we want to create, for example, financial mechanisms that will have an impact on conservation, that we're making sure that all of the activities where women are included, that they are considering that value into the value chain. This is also important because we have been working on land tenure. Someone talked about land tenure, and I'll tell you a story in just a moment. But we have a campaign, Her Land, Her Right. Sometimes I say that it should be also Her Ocean because it's also about the marine ecosystems. But we should be shaping a common agenda across the 3 Rio conventions around promoting women's land rights and increase gender equality in the land use sector. And just to give you an example, also in my home country, in Mexico, what happened a couple of years ago. So we have a very specific type of land tenure called ejido. And the ejidos are managed by ejidatarios. It's managed mainly by men. And the thing is that this type of land tenure has existed for almost 300 years. But what has happened is that when someone died, ejidatario would inherit the ejido or his small plot to his son, because women were not allowed legally to inherit land when you're talking about an ejido. And this was just changed 2 years ago, after 300 years. So this access to legally access to land is also just beginning, and we're just crawling around. We're not just walking. So we need to make sure that this access to land also talks to the equity. And as my colleague from Nepal was saying, this is not only about the agenda on biodiversity or climate change or land use degradation. It's also about talking to legislators, talking to other sectors to make sure that gender, of course, when we're talking about biodiversity, is also taught in the legislator agendas. And finally, another thing is to ensure identification, documentation, recognition, and support for women's effective governance practice and specialized knowledge. We were saying, someone was saying at the beginning that we need to make sure that we are not developing super bullets because they won't work. We know that solutions are extremely based on context, and we need to make sure that we are offering those options. Of course, we can adapt and adopt some practices, some good policies from other countries, but not copy-paste, because that won't work definitely. And I think all of here are conscious about that. But the question here is how to accelerate the rhythm of delivery, of implementation, if we need to come up with ideas. And that's why, if we're talking about gender, we also need to talk about generational transitions as well. How are we committing to including more youth in these conversations? Overall, another thing that we will be discussing in the upcoming weeks and months is the measured progress and enhanced parties accountability. There is still no agreed headline indicator for these targets. And as you know, the monitoring framework will be discussed at SwedBio in October. So we need to make sure that beyond the headline indicator that will be probably agreed, or crossing my fingers, that we have disaggregated data by gender. And by gender, I'm not saying only women and men. We hope that in some countries we can go beyond this. And I want to tell you this story because what we have been seeing in Mexico as well is that there are a lot of opportunities to mainstream gender policies in places where there are a lot of farmers identifying with other genders that are not necessarily women and men. And I'll tell you in a minute. But as my colleague from IUCN will mention in a moment, with the RISE initiative that has been developed, we decided to couple up efforts with a GEF project, which is focused on tourism in coastal ecosystems. And the idea was 2 COPs ago, when we were talking about mainstreaming tourism and mainstreaming other industries or other sectors, how to make sure that biodiversity was included or mainstreamed in those sectors. And we were talking about the tourism sector. We created a GEF project. This GEF project is being developed. And with the RISE initiative, we decided to put together a project that is working in 7 municipalities, and 3 of them are within the top 20 most violent municipalities in Mexico, and they are in coastal municipalities. In 3 of those municipalities, we've seen the most number of killings of women only because they are women, only because people decide not to be identified as women or men, because they decide to be a third gender. So for us, it is very important to make sure that the policies that we will be working in the upcoming 3 years, that there is a development of training for over 150 youth, and that we can assess and address gender violence in the ecotourism sector linked to the environment. We also want to integrate a gender perspective and the prevention and mitigation of gender violence in a municipality regulatory framework. And finally, strengthen 6 community tourism businesses led by women. This is being the most difficult because there are no supports from the municipalities specifically for women. And even if we have a federal framework that can support women, state frameworks, at a very local level, sometimes it's very difficult. So we need to walk the talk. We need to make sure that we are designing policies that are designed from a bottom-up approach, and that we are mirroring whatever is happening in the international and federal agendas that can be then implemented at a municipal stage. I would leave it there for a moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucia. So I think we're talking about synergies. You're also looking at ground realities. You're also really understanding that we don't have a silver bullet. We need to be looking at a very situational context, situation to really mold of how this GBF and gender balanced action could be used. It could be like the municipality might be different. So of course you touched upon the links with gender-based violence and the environment. I'm going to make this absolutely related to our next young panel. So Samantha, who is with ActionAid, is also one of the grantees or partners with the IUCN and USAID. It's called the Rights Challenge. So I will ask her to share a little bit about what the Rights Challenge is, what the focus of it, because it was built around a 2-year research undertaken by IUCN with the aid of USAID of looking at gender-based violence and environmental linkages. And that's one of the reasons why we also been partnering with IUCN to link this up and see how we can embed it into the larger work of the CBD. So Samantha, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for sharing most of these stories, because I'm so much relating to them. It's so amazing how we different, areas, but the stories are really very similar. So as the moderator has already said, the RISE project is a resilient, inclusive, sustainable environment, which links gender with the environment. It's a very great opportunity to actually be in this moment of sharing, because it really uplifts what we are doing on the ground, and learning that there are a lot of conventions and a lot of collaborations that are willing to help support the success of the IUCN and the RISE project that is working on the addressing gender-based violence in the environment. So I'll not talk a lot more than what we just work on, because we are working on the ground. And not to forget another friend I have in the audience who is also working in the RISE project in another country in Southern America, in Mexico. Yes. So the RISE project is being implemented in 5 main areas at this point of time, one which she has already alluded to. Particularly in Zambia, under ActionAid, we are working in the fisheries department, where there are high levels of violence cases. And the government itself and the responsible partners are not too sure how to handle the violence in the environment, because when a case goes to the service providers or the judicial systems, they think it's just business. It's a deal gone bad. We cannot address it. It's not a gender-based violence case. Maybe it's an agricultural issue, not GBV. And when they go to the fisheries department, the one that's responsible for the fisheries department, they equally feel the response is equally that they're also not responsible in handling their issues, because those are sexual issues and not fisheries issues. But honestly, there is a link between the environment, or I can say the water resources and the gender-based violence. As I said, in Zambia, where we are working from, the levels are really so high. So the situation is that the men are the owners of the resources, right? they're the ones that do the act of fishing, and the women are the ones that do the pre and the post, harvesting processes, and they also do the selling. So women would go to the fishing camps and buy the fish. But trust me, even anyone who's here, if you were to go there, you're not going to find the fish that you're looking for if you're not going to be involved in any sexual relationship with the men that are responsible, that go direct in the water to fish. All right. It's also easy for women to share their stories because number one, they're embarrassing and they're not culturally accepted. And most of the times they are the ones to be blamed. Like, how can you have sex for fish? Right. So it's not an easy project, I can say. There are a lot of challenges, and some of the challenges we just named them as we are implementing the project, but it's not so easy. But you realize that the violence, the sexual violence especially, really works as it's a result, and it's also a cause of depletion of fish in the water, and just other unsustainable methods of natural resource management and biodiversity. So that's why it becomes very important that we look and we handle all these issues. And as we are also implementing the project, we realize that there are a lot of other, the other things that need to be done before we can access the information that we want. As my colleagues have mentioned, to say we need to finance everything around gender, and we don't just want to tick in the boxes to say there was women participation, there were 300 women and there were 200 women. We want their full participation, equal and just and fair participation, and we also want to ensure that the impact is also measured, and not just the quantity of how many men or women were there, but also the impact that it is both on the environment itself and even on the lives of human beings. The way we do our project mostly is about capacity building. There is a lot that needs to be learned because one main thing that we have realized in the rice project is everywhere that is being implemented is that there is silence. There's silent burden. The violence has been, accepted. Meanwhile, it's not so easy. It's not so easy for you to look for a livelihood. You want to make sure that at least you feed your family, but you cannot access the resources because without you being involved in a sexual relation. And this is different from, this is different from, I can go into prostitution, right? As in, you are not willing, you don't want it, but you just have to do it because you cannot live without it. And usually this leads to other exploitation of natural resources, so they don't have any option. So it's really a very good opportunity for us to present this, because I know that there is going to be more collaboration, as it has already been taught, on making sure that this issue is scaled up to other areas, because we are just working on few areas, but we realize that the agency is elsewhere and we need to collaborate. Otherwise, we cannot be working on one area and the other area. They are actually going ahead with the sustainable management of natural resources. And then maybe finally, we also work with the service providers, also work with the government, particularly in our country. When it comes to gender, it's not receiving as much attention and focus as it's supposed to receive, right? So it's not easy to even address the issue. So such conventions and such strategies that are being, realized in these areas, we work even for the betterment of such projects, because with the government itself, it's also going to realize that if these issues are being addressed at another level, then it becomes an idea for them to also address them. I think in a nutshell, that's all I can share. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so very much. These are really very insightful examples and experiences. And I think it's really very time for us to really look deeper into that. I'll give you an example, and I think this is like I don't have a conversation. You know, we talk about these meetings, we talk about its advocacy, we usually throw jargons out. You know, the transformative change and leaving no one behind in human rights. When we really come to the ground level, we really don't address specific barriers that exist. You know, we always talk about the political will. You know, that's one for us. But at the end of it, then you also realize that how can we really ensure that these policies that are made at international level do actually impact women or the whole society at the ground level by not exacerbating burdens on anyone, especially on their rights. You know, either you're talking about any kind of project or any kind of initiative that you're looking at. So I'm really also hoping that the way that the countries would take on this on the national level of how, but it'll be about perceptions, right? It's going to be how the global goals and targets are perceived by the national governments as their priorities. What are the priorities or how they will mold it? It's not going to be exactly the same goals and targets. So how would you really make sure that within this framework that they really do adhere to the principle of saying that it's going to be a human rights-based approach, it is going to be an inclusive approach, and it is going to be something that is really not going to either harm biodiversity, but at the same people take away the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, but in particular of women and youth. And these are the ground realities we're talking about. You don't see those linkages, right? Because we're talking about the projects, but how they will really have an implication. So maybe this, I feel like you talk about the social inclusion part of that, right? You're talking about inequalities, how do we look at the social, cultural, economic environment, like we need to take that into a package and see. So thank you so very much. I'm going to keep a last question here because I've asked David, give you a few minutes more to wrap up. So because we wanted to also have something, so is there anybody from the audience who would have a remark or a complimentary addition or your experience? Please feel free to share, or if you would ask the speakers. Please do share if you have anything to share, questions and reflections. Okay, all right. So having said that, before I wrap up, I'm going to go with the speakers quickly again, just saying that thank you so very much for being on the panel. I know some of you had to rush to another event. So thank you so much for being here, do engage. So now you know them, if you see them around the halls, do please reach out to them. And thank you so much for all of you for also being here. Now, having said that, I'm going to again indulge Basil to come here again and give us a closing remark for this, for us to wrap it up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and very interesting debate. I've noted, I'll be short, I've noted three elements, three things that are particularly important, and a conclusion. The first one is the link with human rights. Is that notion that we cannot talk about gender issues without talking about human rights. And that's something we should keep in mind. And I'll certainly keep endeavor to do that. The second one is land use rights and how advancing and having proper regime for land use rights is a way to advance women's rights, human rights, and the GEF. The third point is about the need for speed. And I'm being facetious here, but the need for fast implementation and the fact that we don't have time. And then we're gonna need to advance on all those fronts at the same time, and we cannot wait. So gender issues is not something we're gonna do after 2030. It is something we're gonna do today, tonight, tomorrow. As a way of conclusion, what I would tell you is sometimes we think about those issues as what can we do to advance gender issues? Others are thinking about what can women do to advance biodiversity. and the GEF. My sense it's not a choice. They're both at the same time. And we have to advance that. So it is a little bit frightening, it is a little bit challenging to try to do everything, but we have no choice to do it. And I think we can do it together. Thank you very much.
I don't have anything else to say after that, so I just want to say thank you so very much for keeping and for colleagues and friends who are here from 1 p.m. and we had to make them wait. Thank you so much for indulging with us on the time. To be honest, I will also acknowledge some of the CBD people who are here. Thank you so much. Also the effort of what we have, the GBF, is all your collective efforts too. And for all the participants and all the volunteers, I really want to thank them for helping me with the technician and also taking photography because we didn't have help here. And also technician at the back for helping me with my presentation to make sure everything is there. And with that, we have, if you want to stay back, we have about 7 minutes video because we wanted to, like I said, the space is not enough to bring all the voices, but we'll just do the transition to the event. We have like 7 minutes video to just show some voices from the Women COP15. You could get up, listen, and also maybe network with each other. Thank you so much for being here.